Hello, and welcome to Headstrong. My name is Louis Strong, and I host this show. If this is the first time you are listening to Headstrong, this is a podcast where I sit down with a number of individuals in the public eye to talk to them about their lives and their careers, to understand what the word headstrong means to them. Now, this series, I have been chatting to a number of cricketers, both past and present, in a series coined an Innings with. This series has been generously sponsored by Ascot Group and McGill and Partners. I cannot thank them enough for their support throughout this series. The guests I've spoken to have been wonderful. I've spoken to Joss Butler, Dom Best, Jason Holder, Tino Best, some wonderful, wonderful people and cricketers who have all had stellar careers. This is the final episode of Headstrong Season 5 and Innings with, and I am finishing it off with an absolute legend of the cricket game. I am joined by Sir Andrew Strauss. This series, we have been supporting the Ruth Strauss Foundation, and because of Sir Andrew, it is rooted in the game of cricket. But this episode tackles a lot more important things than just the game of cricket. We talk about his late wife, Ruth, and the incredibly important work that the Ruth Strauss Foundation does. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode of Headstrong. And if you would like to donate to the charity, please text RSF10 to 70191. Do enjoy the episode. Sir Andrew, thank you very much for joining me on Headstrong. It means a lot that you're joining me, although it seems like you've got a bit of a better deal than I do.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here, which is in Barbados. So it's definitely a pleasure to be here, but it's also a pleasure to be on your podcast, and obviously, delighted that you guys are supporting the Ruth Strauss Foundation as well. So really happy to support.
No, we're really, really, really pleased to be supporting such a wonderful charity. I just wanted to ask you if you actually think you could recognise me or not. We are on Zoom. I've met you probably, I think, 3 or 4 times now. There's only one occasion where I think you might remember it, or 2, but one is quite funny.
Oh no, this is bad. I mean, I have the worst memory for both names and faces, which is never a good thing. But perhaps you've got a bit more facial hair than the last time I met you.
I think you're probably right. So the first time you'll probably think was a bit more interesting than the second. The first time was we were at school and you came to a charity event.
Yeah, I do remember that very well. Yeah.
And the second occasion, actually, this one you'll probably enjoy, was with Mike O'Connor. You'd given a net to a charity auction, and we'd turned up to Lord's, having a lovely time, going to a cricket net with yourself. And 45 minutes goes by, no sign of the England skipper. Mike gets on the phone and gives Sir Andrew a call and says, "Where are you?" And you go, "I don't know what you're talking about."
I do remember.
And then we did get some special treatment. So luckily you did turn up and we had some good time in the net.
That was not one of my proudest moments. Yeah, I've got to be honest, which is, that was the sort of nudge that told me I needed to get a PA. So hopefully I'm a little bit better organised now.
Absolutely. Well, I'm talking to you now at the time of a vaccine being distributed here in the UK. And that's obviously why you find yourself out stranded, I'm going to put very loosely, out in Barbados. As I say, it's been a heartbreaking and disastrous kind of 2020, but I don't want to go into too much detail of how you've been over that year, but how do you reflect on it almost, and how that year has passed from a personal perspective and your family perspective?
Well, look, I mean, it's been a long, I hate that expression, but it's been a long journey for everyone, hasn't it? And, I think my overall reflection is, it's made us appreciate the things that we take for granted so often. So, our own individual health being the obvious one, which, especially as younger people, we tend to feel like we're kind of infallible and that we're going to live forever. And obviously COVID has sort of brought it into the front of our minds, just how important our health is. And then also, what we miss out on and what we need to treasure. So, that time with friends and family, when it's there all the time, perhaps we don't appreciate it and we don't use it, and we don't get round to getting in touch with people, etc. When it's not there, you realise actually that's very much the essence of all our well-being is how we interact with people. It's being able to spend time with our parents and our siblings, and also to spend time with our children as well. And I suppose that has been one upside of this, actually, is, homeschooling and everything. We've kind of been in each other's company a bit more than perhaps we would otherwise. And that both brings pros and cons. So the pros are you do get a bit more one-on-one FaceTime with your kids. On the downside, we're sort of living in each other's pockets a bit more, which can make things a bit combustible at times. But
absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's definitely been a voyage of discovery for all of us, and it's tested our resilience and our it's forced us all to ask questions of ourselves, and we know we're going to come out the other side. We know it will be better for it, but while we're going through it all, and I sort of hesitate to say that, given that I'm in the sunshine in Barbados at the moment, but we've all had to dig pretty deep as well, haven't we?
Absolutely. I mean, I do, before we do come on to talk about the incredible work of the foundation and particularly some of the points that you talked about there, I would like to talk to you briefly about COVID itself and perhaps the way that it's portrayed in the news, because certainly from a personal perspective, when I do watch the news, and I am reluctant to say that I do occasionally because it is actually quite, it's not an enjoyable experience at the moment, but they talk of the death toll as a figure and a statistic and not necessarily the personal aspect of it, which is quite challenging. And ultimately there are people's lives that being, wholly affected by this. How is it possible that we can change that outlook instead of reading into the statistic as opposed to the personal aspect of the COVID itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point you make. And, at all times, the government are being talking about being guided by the science and whatever, and you're obviously looking at data and statistics as a way of judging how well we're handling the pandemic or otherwise. I mean, I think for me, you're absolutely right to focus on every single one of those people that either has died or has been in intensive care or whatever. It's been a hugely traumatic experience. And then, factor on top of that, the fact that so many people have died without their loved ones being there with them, and I think that is the one that really gets me, having been through a similar situation with Ruth, that the power, not the power is probably not the right word, but the peace that we found in those last months, weeks, days and hours where we were able to be with each other and kind of go through that experience together. So, that bit I feel very strongly about. I know it can't be helped, but that must be incredibly lonely for people that are, they're in intensive care, struggling to breathe, and not having those that they love or that they rely on most around them. So, always important we keep conscious of that. And I certainly hope, in the this is not like a war, but it's the same sort of feeling sometimes that we're going through an extraordinary set of circumstances, and you just hope that out of this some good can come.
No,
and
absolutely.
It's not all doom and gloom, and we move to a better place once we're out the other side.
I think having an optimistic approach is fundamental at the moment. But you briefly touched on it there, talking about your homeschooling. What has your teaching been like?
I've tended to be quite hands-off for all sorts of reasons. A, because most of what my boys are doing now, I can't remember what. I'm not in a position to help them with it. B, because I just irritate them when I'm around too much. And C, because we all need our own space. But I think it's almost outside of school. It's kind of like the book ending of lessons, so before or afterwards, or having a bit of lunch together, or just having the space to have a conversation and a chat. That's the gold dust, which is difficult for parents. I'm noticing more and more that as the kids get older, my kids are 15 and 12, that they're looking towards their peer group much probably more than they are their parents. So any opportunity I can where I can make a slight difference and interact with them is good from my perspective.
So you're finding that balance there then, I suppose, and it's not ultimately necessarily about the education, but the interactions thereafter as well. That's really nice.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely right. Yeah.
I imagine that your children are probably experiencing a slightly different childhood to what you were experiencing at a very young age. I mean, I know they're a bit older now, but you were brought up in your early years out in South Africa. Do you have any particular fond early memories before you moved over here in the UK? Do you have any?
Yeah, so many fond early memories because I think, I mean, this is going to make me sound very old now, but it's also a reflection on South Africa as a country. You know, when I was young, there was no real TV. You know, TV came on in South Africa at like 6 p.m. and it was alternate nights. You know, one night it was English, next night it was Afrikaans and whatever. So TV didn't play a big role in my upbringing until, you know, perhaps I was 9 or 10. And obviously with great climate and weather, you know, we're outdoors doing stuff and, you know, going on safari and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, I have that sort of very kind of, you know, those fond memories of a really simple life, actually, where my sisters and I had to sort of keep ourselves occupied and you know, think up games and whatever to play. You know, I know that my kids really haven't had that. You know, the world is a very different place these days. And, you know, one of my primary struggles is to try and get them off their video games and whatever, which so many other parents are going through the same thing. So it is a different world. And I kind of hark back to those days. Quite hard for us to get back there, I suppose. That feels like that horse is bolted.
We are lucky, of course, to be speaking from so far away, though. So we've got to thank technology for something.
That is true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I'm very familiar with both schools that you went to, Caldicott and Radley, having played them both when I was at school as well. Maybe in a slightly different era to yourself, without being rude.
Well, yeah, absolutely. No.
But do you remember?
You've definitely got more hair than I've got.
Do you remember that transition of family life from South Africa to the UK much? Because it sounds very much like you went from this simple but incredibly enjoyable life to a bit more of a busier life, because I know exactly what boarding school is like, and it sounds like you kind of were really kind of thrown into the deep end somewhat.
Yeah, I wouldn't make too much of it. I definitely think, you know, that whole kind of boarding school upbringing, you know, it's you become part of an institution and your peer group become a very important part in your lives and whatever. And I loved it all, you know, being good at sport, and you know, those schools are really well set up for someone like myself. I don't think they were necessarily well set up for everyone. Let's put it that way. And certainly, you know, like all of us, the first couple of years of boarding was quite confronting for me, and you know, got homesick and all that sort of stuff. But when I look back at the career I ended up having, I think boarding school prepared me really well for that. You know what I mean? Being away from home, traveling around. Being in a team environment, you know, that was very much the upbringing I had, and I didn't feel out of place at all touring around the world. Whereas I know that some of my teammates for both Middlesex and England, you know, that was completely sort of diametrically opposite to their upbringing, and so they struggled and they got homesick and they felt very difficult, very hard to be away from home for long periods. So yeah, I suppose I was lucky that I got prepared well for the career I had.
Yeah, I think I was going to talk to you about everything that you touched on there, the kind of adaptable features of boarding school into a professional sport setting. I know that from a personal perspective, that boarding school shaped me in a way that, you know, it's such a competitive environment and everyone is striving for success ultimately and to be the best, and it's full of testosterone, particularly in an all-boys school. But ultimately, that's where some of your lasting friendships come from. And I know from a personal point of view that your best friend, or one of your best friends, you opened the batting with down at Radley, didn't you? Ben Hutton, which is magnificent. And I think that's one of the lasting features of boarding school as well. So would you put your boys in a similar place?
Well, interesting. I mean, my son's aren't boarding at the moment, actually, although my older son's at Wellington College. I think he's desperate to board now. He's 15 and I'm quite keen for him to do so, but it's more, so it's not like I think our own unique set of circumstances meant that it didn't feel right for us. You know, Ruth was not well, and then obviously Ruth passed away and whatever. So, you know, the idea that the boys could kind of have slight refuge from that ultra competitive, testosterone-fueled environment felt right at the time for us. But I definitely don't have any massive hang-ups with that. I just think you shouldn't just sort of follow that course just because your dad went to a certain school or your granddad or whatever. I think we should always be questioning what is right for our kids. And those boarding schools, I mean, they're fantastic educational facilities. There's no doubt about it. But there's a lot of choice out there these days as well, isn't there?
Absolutely. And education is always striving for better. And actually, I hope during COVID, hopefully people are waking up as well, realizing that the essential necessity for the remote learning in particular, and how everyone needs all these kind of laptops and increasing facilities.
And stimulation and great role models and mentors and all that sort of stuff, hugely important.
Absolutely. Now I know for a fact that you were a great rugby player at school as well, and I was speaking to a friend before recording this podcast, and he wanted to ask me about some of the transferable skills from sport to sport. Because he wanted to question whether maybe players or individuals specialise a little bit too early in their chosen sports. Because we look at the likes of Jos Buttler and his hockey ability, which obviously has been transferable into his drives, and then Owen Morgan on the hurling and maybe some of his unorthodox shots. Well, how do you feel about that transferable skills from sport to sport?
Yeah, so I think just the general point about early specialisation. I'm very conflicted with it. My instinct is I think we shouldn't be specialising early. I really feel like obviously the downsides of sort of burnout and, treating sport too seriously too young, I think is a really unhealthy thing. The only slight counteraction to that is, the best players, and when we're competing with teams like India, for instance, where they're playing cricket 11 months of the year outdoors, you kind of feel like we would be a long way behind if we're not focusing on one sport all the time as well. So, I think instinctively, I do feel we should be making sport fun, certainly until the age of 15, 16, for those people at the right top that want to go on and have professional careers, and that you should be having a decent period of time off every year to do other sports. And certainly, when you talk about those transferable skills, I felt, I didn't just play rugby, I played hockey and golf and, any sport with a ball, basically. I think from rugby, the big thing that transferred over was courage. I was quite a small guy, as fly half, and you have these big, certainly playing at university, these big, huge guys running at you, and, you have to suck it up and find a way of having the courage and the willpower to put yourself in harm's way. And suddenly, fast forward 5 years and you're opening the batting against Shoaib Akhtar or someone in a test match, and you're in exactly that same place. Very easy to be intimidated and feel like you want to cower down, and you can't do that. So I definitely felt that from rugby, but I think every sport I played influenced me in one way. A lot of tennis. I played a lot of tennis, and that gives you it's like better feeling with your hands and stuff like that. So I definitely feel there is something in that. And I always wish, I've always had this wish that the main sports in this country could come together and provide a sort of effectively a talented kids program to be able to play a bit of all those sports and get the right sort of coaching and support in place, rather than just forcing people to just do the one sport.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'm pleased I asked it. No, I think that's a great idea, actually. And I think everyone deserves the right to certainly play all these sports and come together and bring all these unique skill sets into their own life, because I suppose they're all transferable through everywhere, every walk of life, actually. That's really
and just I think also, I think we all get caught up in the idea of those, playing sports professionally, which obviously we know that only a tiny, 0.1% probably go on and play. So for everyone else, it is about keeping it fun and light and enjoyable, and all that stuff about making lasting friendships and all those sort of cliches are absolutely imperative. That's if you're going to do it, you want to do it for those reasons.
No, absolutely. Well, let's delve into your career. You mentioned Shoaib Akhtar there, but let's talk about cricket now, the bit that I'm probably the most excited about. This is incredibly repetitive for you, but for the listener, we're going to go through a couple of stats. Which I can back on your face, you're already bored. 100 test matches at an average of 40.9 for England, half of which he captained, 127 ODIs, and 8th on the list of England all-time run scorers with over 11,000 runs. Now, those are just facts and figures. But, you sit there and you think about that kind of thing. Do you ever reflect on that in a way and you go, you just sit back and go, I am actually incredibly damn proud of that? Or, you go, actually, do you know what? That is pretty amazing. Because you have to just sit there and think, actually, do you know what? Because a lot of people in this, I think English people in particular, are not willing to celebrate success in a way that perhaps other countries are or nations are. So I think it's really important to celebrate such immense success. With that, not in an arrogant way. I would never expect that. But I just think it's so important. I hope that you do, because you.
No, I do. I definitely, and most particularly for me, because I was never a superstar cricketer, at any level, at any stage in my life. I was playing at school and I was playing a bit for Oxford under-19, but I don't think anyone ever saw me as probably being a test cricketer full stop. So to make my test debut felt like a massive bonus, and then to score my first 100, and then it all felt like upside to me, if I'm honest with you. I do remember quite early in my England career sitting down with the psychologist at the time and putting some goals together. And, I don't know if this was a healthy thing or an unhealthy thing, but in my mind, I kind of said, like, if I had to be really greedy, I'd say I'd love to play 100 test matches and score 7,000 runs and, maybe have an opportunity to captain England one day. So, to tick all of those off the list, and then obviously, to have those incredible successes in Australia in Ashes series or whatever, I felt like I've achieved everything I've wanted to and more. And, very grateful that I had the opportunity in the first place. Pretty humbled that I was able to do it. And of course I'm proud. I mean, I love to be able to, I was going to say show what I did to my kids, because occasionally you get those sort of reruns on Sky and whatever. And my kids seem to have very little respect or interest, and they're like, "Oh, Dad, you play like an old school cricketer," and all that sort of stuff. But still, I'm sure they're proud of me on one level.
Of course they are. Of course. I mean, let's go right back to the beginning. You mentioned there the Oxford under-19s. You played domestic cricket for Middlesex, and you briefly touched on it there as well. You kind of were setting smaller goals, perhaps season on season, and then you'd say one thing, but when you got into professional cricket, you weren't necessarily, the first couple of seasons, you weren't necessarily hitting massive scores and averaging enormously. What were your initial goals as you entered professional cricket? Did you have an overall goal, or was it actually, as you say, smaller goals and then hitting that one and then making the next one?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me was getting a contract with Middlesex in the first place, because if you're outside the system, it's quite hard to get in it. So, I had to do a few trials and whatever. I was lucky when I got my trials for Middlesex that I scored runs straight away. And, it just so happens that if on another day I might have got a good ball and it never would have happened. Once you're in the system, then I think it gets much simpler. You're part of that environment, that institution, and you look at what's next for you. So I was looking at all the other batsmen in the second team and saying, look, I need to be doing at least as well as these guys. And then, aspirations to get in the first team, and then, aspirations to be a cap player and blah, blah, blah. And you kind of know what the next step is. For me, I'm very competitive. I want to do well. And so when I saw people like Mark Ramprakash and Justin Langer and Angus Fraser and all these guys that have played international cricket, I was like, well, if they can do it, I should aspire to do that myself, and I should push myself maybe harder than some of my teammates, and do everything I can to make it happen. And bearing in mind that for many people it doesn't happen, but that was definitely my aspiration.
And that's that boils back down to as well that drive that was probably instilled at you from school as well.
Yeah, I think it's I don't sort of tend to overanalyze my psychology, but the drive for me, it's just a competitive drive, really. It's one that I kind of...
A traditional sportsman's approach.
Yeah, if I really put myself to something, then I feel like I really want to succeed in it, and I don't want to have any regrets. I'm not one of those people that kind of like, oh, we'll give it a go, and if it works out, then fine. If not, it doesn't matter. I kind of want to give more than that.
Definitely.
And I think, actually, when it's changed a bit in these days, but in the 90s, playing county cricket, it was a very comfortable, easy place. People used to go out on the piss quite a lot, and it was almost frowned upon to push yourself hard. And I never liked that environment, and I was always comfortable being one of those that pushed myself harder than others, and that's perhaps why I sort of went past some of my teammates.
Well, before long, you found yourself in the England team. Something that I've always been fascinated and curious to ask somebody is, particularly someone in your position, is because you've probably been on both ends of the phone, is when someone gets their international call up, who is it that makes that phone call? And do you remember your phone call for that first call up? And how does the conversation go?
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember like it was yesterday, because it was a complete surprise. I was actually on the golf course with Middlesex, just played a game against Scotland. We come back down, and I think we had our championship game later in the week. And then I got a call from David Graveney, the chairman of selectors, basically saying, I'm like, why is he ringing me? Because it wasn't like he was on speed dial for me or whatever.
Was his contact saved?
I think it was, actually. I think, I think it wasn't like a random number. And he said, yeah, look, Michael Vaughan's had an accident in the nets. He's done his knee. Therefore, we're bringing you in. You're going to make your debut for England on Thursday, and we want you to open the batting. And on the one hand, I was like, holy moly, that's 3 days away. And, it was a bit of it took me a while to get my head around it. On the other hand, it kind of was at my home ground, it was at Lord's. I was in great form at the time. I was, at that stage, I think I was 27 years of age. So I felt ready for it. I felt as ready as I was ever going to be. Once the initial shock subsided, it actually got replaced by real excitement rather than dread. I think some people, they sort of dread the potential failure or whatever. I just thought this is an incredible opportunity. It may only be a one-off opportunity. So let's just, take it with both hands and give myself the best chance and see what happens.
Definitely. You solidified your position then after your debut, and then at the top order over the next few tours. And before long, the 2005 Ashes were rolling around. And this was, as a fan and as a nation, particularly different to previous Ashes series. Something that I'm curious to ask you is, how did the mentality shift in the dressing room so drastically to be so incredibly powerful and motivated for success? Because I would argue that perhaps a couple of years previously, it probably wasn't there. The optimism wasn't there, perhaps. What was it in the dressing room? Maybe it was the structure, it was the players, the captaincy, the leadership that changed that mentality to drive for that success that particular year.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you just got to remember back to the 2005. I mean, we hadn't won the Ashes in 17 years. We become very accustomed to being steamrolled by Australia. And there was definitely a sort of inferiority complex there. I think sort of team after team would come up against Australia and just get bullied out of the series very early and end up sort of, going back with your tail between your legs. And kind of, a lot of English players realised that they just weren't as good as these Aussie guys. I think where we were lucky with that 2005 Ashes is we had quite a big group of players that never played against Australia before. We'd been on a big, long, really successful run. I think my first 8 Test matches for England, we won all 8 of them. And Flintoff and Peterson and all these guys were coming in and really showing what they could do. And then we were incredibly well led by Duncan Fletcher, who made sure we were very well prepared for the Aussies, and then Michael Vaughan, who had a very much a kind of a laissez-faire approach in terms of, come on lads, we're just going to have a crack here, and one thing we're not going to do is bow down to these guys. If you kind of look at that Australian team as a team of bullies, which I'm not saying they were, but that was just our perception of them, then we had to stand up and look them in the eye and say we're not going to back down, and that was our attitude all the way through. If Shane Warne was going to bowl us out, well, we were going to land a few punches before he did so, and I think that attitude served us really well.
Definitely. I mean, I look back on that with such incredible memories, and I didn't even go to a game. I mean, to have been
yeah, but it was one
that the nation
it was one
really
of those moments where exactly, and alongside that came a lot of expectation and pressure. So it was a hell of a hard series to be a part of. And, we none of us were sleeping by the end, it felt very fraught. emotionally. But without that, you don't get the incredible highs of coming out the other side and winning.
Well, speaking of a lack of sleep, I want to talk about taking on the England captaincy, because I can imagine you had probably a few sleepless nights prior to even taking on the captaincy, because when you took over the role, as most listeners will know, that was when KP came out, resigned after only a couple of matches. Peter Moore's sacked. What was that transition into the captaincy like? You seem like you're very take it as it is kind of mentality. But was there a fragility going into the role? Were you apprehensive because of what had just happened? Or was it kind of like a clean slate?
I was very apprehensive, yeah. I mean, I think on the surface, it looked like the worst possible time to take over the England team. There were divisions in the team, and obviously everything that happened with Ken Peace and Peter Moore, so we were without a captain and a coach. And I don't think the England captaincy was anything that I really coveted. I think it was something that I felt circumstances need to conspire for you to be a viable candidate. And mainly you have to be in good form, and your place in the team has got to not be in jeopardy. So up to that point, it was always something that might happen in the future, and then it came along, and just when it was sort of first muted to me, I kind of like, well, yeah, let me just have a little think about that and a chat with Ruth and whatever, because you're not just taking on the role, you're taking on a completely new life almost, and it's a 24/7 job. But the more people I spoke to, the more I realised actually the team itself was keen to just move on and come back together again, and I felt like perhaps being quite a senior player in that squad and a guy that most people kind of respected. I felt like, maybe there was an opportunity there for me to sort of bring everyone together and hopefully give them a bit of direction. And, it was at the stage of my career where I felt like a new challenge probably wasn't a bad thing. So I think when push came to shove, once Ruth and I had sort of got our heads around the fact that, that I'd have to commit myself to this for a 3 or 4 year period, then I was really excited. And, as soon as you get excited about it, all these ideas come into your head about what we need to do, who we need involved, et cetera, and it sort of just snowballs from there.
The way that you talk about it, it seems like it's almost a family commitment, that you were talking to Ruth so, openly and almost as of necessity, going, if I take on this role, this isn't just me that's going to be taking on this role. I'm going to need your support, because I anticipate that it's difficult to take a day off, mentally, to take a day off from the England captaincy. So I imagine you probably relied on your family, ultimately, to
exactly.
switch off.
We had 2 young kids. Our kids were 4 and 2 at the time. So, it's a big sacrifice, especially for Ruth, who knew that I was going to be away for long periods. And even when I was at home, I was going to be on the call to Andy Flower, the selectors or whatnot. But, those opportunities, you are very fortunate. Those opportunities come along once in your life, and you can't choose the timing of them. So, I think it was more just about getting ourselves ready for that and steeling ourselves for it, because, you really do need you can't be fighting the sort of family battle as well as the cricket battle. You need the family all aligned behind that. And I look back on it, and I think it's the best thing I've ever done in my life. It taught me so much about myself, about people around me, about high performance, about, what works, what doesn't work, effectively separating the fact from the fiction in terms of all these things you hear around, marginal gains, all those sort of high performance things that you hear. I think until you actually go through it and have to be the one making the decisions, you don't really fully appreciate what it is.
Being skipper, of course, it's glorious when you take the front and centre as the leader with the success and the series wins and lifting the trophies. But with being skipper, you take the responsibility for the losses and the negativity, and particularly facing the media as well. Were there moments as England captain where it did feel too much? And did you ever get to a point where you were reconsidering the role yourself?
I think probably the positive element of my temperament is that I'm pretty calm and contained and laid back. So, I sort of didn't get too highs with the highs, and I didn't get too lows with the lows on a team basis. As long as I felt like, people were still listening to me, and I hadn't lost the dressing room, which I never felt. I think the times where it came problematic is when I wasn't playing well myself. And then you have that whole kind of like weird thing going on in your mind around, I'm trying to lead by examples, but I'm a bit of a passenger in the team at the moment. And, I've got to do what's right for the team. And is it right that I'm still playing in the team or whatever? So, I think in the last year or so of my career, that affected me a bit. And, no one likes to be a passenger. No one likes to feel like they're not pulling their weight. And so that affected me. And the more it affected me, the more it weighed me down, and the harder it became sort of psychologically to keep myself going, actually.
With such a challenge like that, what were your coping mechanisms and what were your techniques? Because, of course, I spoke to some of the boys that I have recorded with on the podcast, and international cricket is all about performances, and to stay in the team, it is performance-driven. But, when you've got the banner of skipper, it's difficult to, literally be dropped from the team, so to speak, if it is performance-driven, because you are the man that's leading the team. How did you deal with your kind of negativity drifting in, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I think the last couple of years of my career, I worked very closely with the England psychologist at the time, Mark Borden, and actually, experimented with a lot of things. But the most helpful thing was mindfulness and meditation. Just quietening down the mind, because there was so much going on up there. I was thinking about team selection, about tactics, about my own game, about retirement, about blah blah blah, family, kids. And so just being able to quieten the mind down and just let those thoughts pass, just allow myself to calm down emotionally was hugely beneficial, and something that I've obviously used a lot subsequent to that as well.
This series is brought to you by two magnificent sponsors, Ascot Group and McGill and Partners. Ascot Group is a global specialty insurance and reinsurance group with a record of underwriting excellence and superior claims service. Founded in 2001, the company provides a broad range of property and casualty solutions to customers worldwide through its platforms in London, Bermuda, and the United States. Ascot is a long-standing supporter of charities with a link to sport, including ongoing sponsorship of the Great Britain Wheelchair Rugby Club. With a recent increase in mental health awareness, the company is particularly proud to support Headstrong Season 5 and Innings with, which focuses on the psychological well-being challenges that arise from professional sport. McGill and Partners is a boutique insurance broker helping corporate clients find specialist solutions for their most challenging and complex risks. Growing rapidly since its launch in 2019, the company operates in the UK, Europe, and the United States, and prides itself on working with some of the biggest companies in the world. And you can find out more on their website, mcgillpartners.com. McGill and Partners understands high performance and the mental health challenges that can be associated with it, regardless of the industry people are working in. The company is fully committed to their employees' well-being and are delighted to be sponsoring the Headstrong podcast series. It is also delighted to support the Ruth Strauss Foundation. Thank you to these two wonderful sponsors.
So that's really interesting about the England captaincy. Now, there are probably a couple of times, and I have to talk about it, and I hope you don't mind me talking about the management of KP in the dressing room, because I can only imagine the challenges myself. I've never been a captain. I like to see myself as a leader, but obviously perhaps not on the cricket field. But maybe that comes down to ability. But dealing with personality versus skill, was it worth it off the pitch? I know that's a $1 million question, and particularly with hindsight, it's difficult to answer that. But how do you manage both the performances on the pitch, but then off the pitch? Because ultimately, you can't necessarily. I know that they're being paid to play international cricket, but it's still their life, and they're allowed to do what they want in the public eye. So it's difficult to find that balance.
I mean, I wouldn't make the distinction sort of on pitch, off pitch. I don't think that's the way I viewed it. I viewed it very much as, what are we trying to achieve as a group of people, right? And are we all bought into that? And if we're all bought into that, then actually having difference in the team, having different ways of looking at the world is a good thing, and something that should be celebrated. And so, for the vast majority of my time captaining KP, he was excellent. Especially bear in mind that he'd been sort of removed as captain and he had access to grind with the ECB and all that sort of stuff. So for the vast majority of the time he was absolutely fine. We got on well. There was a time at the end there where I felt his agenda and the agenda of the team were not aligned, and he was trying to do something that was right for him, and that was actually detrimental to the team, and that was a big issue to me, and that's kind of the background to how everything went wrong in the end. And I think it's always right to ask ourselves the question, could we have managed it differently? Could we have managed it better? I definitely feel like I could have done a couple of things differently. I definitely would never absolve KP from his share of the blame in everything that went on there, because I don't think that'd be right for me to do so. But I think when I look back at it, the vast majority of the time I played cricket for England with KP, it was a really happy time, and he did brilliant things for England. He was a fantastic player, probably the best I ever played with, and England got a lot of benefit from it. He got a lot of benefit from it, and everyone was aligned. It was just when that alignment wasn't there that the issues started coming in.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about now is that transition for you when you left international cricket as a player. You found yourself in the skybox for a period of time. But then you found yourself as a part of the ECB, and you probably had to find that new balance with international cricket and all the new franchises. We're looking at the IPL, the Big Bash, and I think that's certainly where you probably saw. I don't know. I don't want to take words out of your mouth, but you perhaps saw from as a player and that managing KP, because I think particularly he wanted to go out and play the IPL, and that probably didn't align with the England agenda at the time. But now it's so fundamental for players to almost see that as a platform for them to do it. And I know that you were so fundamental in the England team to help facilitate, changing the calendar around. So how important is it for those players to get that experience out in these franchises, even if it doesn't reflect the red ball cricket?
Well, I think, look, I came in as director of cricket with the agenda to win the 2019 World Cup, and I knew our players needed to play franchise cricket to, I think, overcome that sort of slight inferiority complex we had with white ball cricket, but also B, to put themselves in pressure situations as the overseas player needing to perform with, a lot of money riding on your back. I felt that was a good way of replicating the sort of pressure we get in the World Cup. So, that agenda that I had was very different to the agenda that the guys involved with the ECB had previously, which was much more around Test cricket. I think in these days, actually, what I increasingly come to realise is that players actually get energised by being in different environments. And so, back in the day, the ECB was saying, like, well, if they're going to go to the IPL, they're going to be tired and they're going to want to be rested and blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, that's not going to be good for English cricket. And actually, I think over time, what you realise is it probably is a good thing. It refreshes, re-energises, allows them to speak to different people. They come back a little bit more kind of refreshed and ready to go, because if you're playing international cricket all the time, it's a treadmill. You're on that treadmill 300, 350, 320 days a year. So it kind of I think just perceptions of those franchises have changed a lot over the last 10 years.
Definitely. It's so incredible to see, the likes of, for example, Sam Curran going out there and getting the opportunity to play with the India captain, who you wouldn't have thought that 10 years ago when you're on the international cricket scene and doing the circuit. It's just incredible to expose players to others and you ultimately learn from them.
You learn, but also, I think for someone like Sam Curran, that's a great example of, I don't know, he's probably done 2 years worth of maturing in the space of 8 weeks there, being surrounded by those people and, him being given the responsibility of both bat and ball, that's just, it's proper gold dust for him. So he's a great example of why that makes a big difference.
Definitely. Now, in that administration side of cricket, you had been out playing for a while, but was there a yearning to be on that pitch, or were you just be grateful to be immersed in that England community setup once more? Because I know that commentating wasn't quite the same.
Yeah, I enjoyed the commentating, but I think the slight issue of commentating is it's a bit Groundhog Day-ish in the sense that, you're sitting there watching what's going on and,
Sure.
and obviously calling it. I think I suppose I've always liked a challenge, and I've always liked the idea of learning new things, and that director crew job gave me that opportunity to do so. Of course I like being involved, but actually you're not involved in the same way, and your relationships with the players aren't the same as they used to be. So I had to sort of learn to separate myself from them a bit. Look, it was 4 great years, or 3.5 years, great years as director of cricket, and I obviously would have loved to have seen it right through the World Cup, but personal events transpired to make sure that didn't happen.
And that does bring me on to, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm incredibly thankful to you to be supporting the Ruth Strauss Foundation. I really want to talk about Ruth, if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
and just because I think it's such a fundamental conversation, because if these things are never talked about, it's a conversation left unsaid that ultimately should be. And you were in Australia on tour when you learned that Ruth was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and I can only imagine your immediate thoughts were to be with, straight back in the UK and by her side. But can you remember that way you were told and those immediate emotions?
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't quite as simple as that. So I was in Australia, and Ruth got, she went to see a doctor about a couple of issues she had, and they said, look, this doesn't look good. We need to do more tests. And that's when I came home. So, I was there with her when she got her diagnosis. And it was utterly shocking. There's no other way to describe it. It's the worst news you can ever have. A, she's got cancer, having been fit all her life, and B, it's stage 4, so it's incurable. So at some stage, she's going to succumb to this. And, the thought of dying hadn't entered either of our heads ever. And then you start thinking about the kids and, all the things you want to do in life and what this journey is going to be like from now on. Like, you just suddenly, your life is completely different. And, I was in bits. Ruth was much stronger than I was. She was like incredibly accepting of it. I still can't for the life of me quite understand how she managed to get herself in that frame of mind of kind of like, okay, well, we know what's ahead of us, and let's just take it day by day and blah blah blah. But it is horrendous news, and it's worth bearing in mind that 40,000 kids in this country every year have to deal with the prospect of losing a parent from cancer. So our experience is not a new one, and it's not one that was unique to us. There's so many people who go through it, but obviously we don't tend to hear about it that much, and it's a personal journey that people go through. And I feel like one of my jobs is to kind of go to people like, this happens, and we need to prepare ourselves for it. We need to obviously do research into these rare forms of lung cancer, which Ruth had, non-smoking lung cancers, but also we need to help prepare families for the death of a parent, because it's going to happen. None of us want it to happen, but the reality is it is going to happen.
I mean, grief is a word that so many people will shy away from. And you found yourself in the position of raising your 2 boys whilst grieving the loss of your wife. Whilst the support of your family and friends and, of course, your loved ones was immense, how indispensable was professional help for you?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, I just feel like with the best will in the world, people that haven't been through it really can't offer you much advice. It's like, and without being sort of going off too much on a tangent, it's like asking someone who's never played cricket how to open the batting in a test match. Like, they might have watched some cricket and they might be able to give you some advice, but unless you've been to the nitty gritty of it, it's just impossible to really empathise fully. So I found myself gravitating to people that have been through it themselves. And obviously, the counsellor that Ruth and I used, Jenny, who'd had 30, 40 years as a child grief and loss counsellor, just to have her give us some direction to, this is probably what's going to happen. This is what you're going to feel like. These are the things you need to think about. Just so incredibly valuable. And just to feel like we had that person there as a source of counsel was, for Ruth before she died, and then obviously for me after she died, was hugely important.
And talking of value, I can only imagine that after the aid of treatment, and as you say, the incredible mindset of Ruth, you were graced with some incredibly valuable time together as a family. How important was it for you to say just no to everything else? I mean, because you realize at that time what really is important, and you actually then realize how completely and utterly I don't want to say pointless, but cricket is. It's just a game. It's just a game, and people are playing bat and ball. But with news as serious as this, you were given almost a reality check in the sense that cricket is just a game. You don't need. It's not as important as the family and the relationships that you spend with people and bonding time with your family.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think. It's almost going full circle to what we're experiencing at the moment with COVID. But I think my whole professional life had always been about work coming first and the family fitting around work. And it was only in those sort of final 12 months of Ruth's life, or probably even the final 9 months, where we sat down and went, this can't be the case now. It has to be work fitting around the family, and we have to spend some time creating memories and getting our priorities right. And I suppose you walk away from that going, well, why does it have to take someone being diagnosed with an incurable illness for that to be the right way round? I mean, there's a pretty strong argument that it should be right that way around all the time, or certainly a balance between the two. But I don't know if we do that enough. And, maybe this COVID crisis allows people to do that a bit more as well. Like, working from home a bit more and understanding that there are times where you really do have to switch off from work and be engaged and connected with your kids and your family. I feel like that's something we need to take seriously, because otherwise we'll all have regrets. I've got no doubt about that.
I mean, you mentioned there as well the work that you did with the counsellor that you worked with, and as we know, seeking advice from GPs and counsellors and professionals, in my opinion, is often seen, or not my opinion. People often see it as acceptance of defeat, which is a real shame the way that society's built that up. But it's most definitely a sign of looking forward to move as an individual and improve your own mindset. What was your specific approach? How was your day-to-day mindset built up? Because I know that it was that careful balance of dealing with the past and then the future and the present.
Yeah, well, I think my instinct was always to let's cross that bridge around death when we come to it. Let's not overly worry about it now. Let's just take each moment as it comes. Whereas Ruth's mindset was very different, and she was very open and honest. She said, "Look, I can't just let it go. What I need to do is make sure that I'm as prepared as possible for it, that you and the boys are as prepared as possible for it. And then once I know that's taken care of, then I can actually enjoy living my life." And it's a bit like that sort of thing that hangs over you. You've got an essay to do, or you've got a piece of work, and until you actually do it, you can't relax and enjoy yourself. And it's a similar thing to that. Like, us actually doing it, going to see Jenny, was like a massive weight off both of our minds. Ruth felt much better about it. I felt hugely better about it. And we were able to actually, address the elephant in the room, which we'd been sort of avoiding for probably 9 months up to that point. So, my advice to anyone who's facing a similar situation is, you'll know when the right time. I'm not saying you have to do it as soon as you're diagnosed or whatever, but there will come a time where it's weighing on your mind, and don't just let it weigh on your mind. Do something about it. Be proactive about it. You won't regret it at all. And it will help both you and your family to be much better placed to deal with what's to come. And we always try and, obviously, we don't like to see our kids going through pain, and we want to protect them. But this is not something you can protect them from. They have to go through it with you.
And this comes down to, as well, the really important work that the Ruth Strauss Foundation does, because we see grief and death in our culture and society as a bit of a taboo. And I know that that's something that you're really keen to challenge with the work that you do at the Ruth Strauss Foundation. So how are you bringing up that conversation and making that less of a taboo?
Yeah, so I think that there are a number of things. I mean, yes, one of our objectives is to have that conversation about death and be open and honest about it, and having this conversation with you is one way we do that. But what we also want is, our primary motivation is around research into rare forms of lung cancer, but also pre-bereavement support for people. So helping families when they're facing the death of a parent to get that professional help they need. And so right at the moment, we've launched a pilot study to help train healthcare professionals to offer that advice, because actually there's a real deficit of expertise there. And most people are very uncomfortable about talking about death because they're not trained in it. They're worried about saying the wrong thing or giving the wrong advice. And obviously it's very emotive. You don't want to get it wrong. So, there's a bit of an education process that we need to go through as a starting point.
So that's incredible that the Ruth Strauss Foundation is committing to that. What does 2021 see for the foundation then this year? Because it's so challenging, because I was speaking to some of the team, and of course last year it was so different in terms of how you were raising funds. But the days that you do in cricket, wearing red is beautiful to see out on the ground. But what else can we see in 2021 with such important work that you do?
Well, I think, on the fundraising side, there's still quite big question marks as to when we can start doing fundraising. And, we'd be very hopeful that we'd be able to do something similar to what we did last year with the Red for Ruth Day at the Test match. We still conversations going on about when that's going to be at the moment. On the actual us helping people side, I think as a starting point that there are ways that people... we can give direct support through our website. If people contact our website, the pilot study will be well underway, and we're hoping to be rolling that out as soon as possible once we get the right sort of results back on it. And then we've got all sorts of ambitious plans around both the research and the support side, moving beyond the first 6 months of this year. I mean, we're obviously conscious that we're right in lockdown at the moment, and so timelines. It's always a bit tricky to know how quickly this is going to all move forward. But, it's a passion of mine. We need to do it. There's a gap. People aren't getting the support they need. And I'm just determined to make this foundation something that Ruth will be proud of. So, we're not going to let up in our efforts. We're going to be redoubling those efforts over the next 3 to 6 months.
And as a listener, apart from being able to donate to such a wonderful charity, what else can we do, can I do, and anyone else do to contribute to the foundation, but also to the topic of bereavement?
Well, I think, first of all, just have a read of our website, because I think there's quite a lot of information on there, including, if you want to fundraise for us. And, the fact that you are supporting us with this podcast is a great example of, there's so many different creative ways in which people can help us in our mission. Of course, we can't do it without money, but we also need more support. We need people to, take on challenges for us. Sometimes we need people to help us run the business in terms of volunteering, et cetera, et cetera. So, all I'd say is we try and keep in contact with people as much as possible, either via the website or if they sign up with us to receive our information and whatnot. And, what we're trying to do is create a bit of a community of people that all believe in what we're trying to do. And, hopefully we can do that.
Well, I, for one, hope that we can have crowds back at cricket. So I might be able to attend a Red for Ruth Day. I'd be so excited to go to something like that, because I can only imagine the atmosphere at something like that. So fingers crossed for crowds.
Fingers crossed.
Because I know that it was so powerful anyway, but having a crowd there must just lift it by even more so. All the best with everything.
Thank you.
With the foundation, and I'm so happy to be supporting the foundation. But just before we end the podcast, I ask this question to every guest that comes on the show, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say. What does the word headstrong mean to you?
That's an interesting one. I think on its when you first mentioned that, headstrong sounds like someone who is almost a little bit too almost too clear in their thinking. I have certain ideas and therefore I'm going to plow them through. But then I think if you think about it in a bit more detail, I think what it's talking to me is a bit more around resilience, and I think actually, I don't know. I mean, I always look back at my time as a cricketer and whatever, and people ask me what's the greatest trait someone needs to be able to succeed as an international cricketer, and I always say it's about resilience. You've got to have that strength. You've got to be able to. It's not about not having bad days and bad times, because we all have that. It's about bouncing back from those and finding a way to navigate your way through the tough times in life. That's what I suppose head strength is to me when you say it in that context. And that's what we're trying to do with the Ruth Strauss Foundation. It's what I'm trying to do with my life and with my kids' lives. And, I think COVID's forced us to do that more than perhaps ever before.
Definitely. I really like that answer. Thank you very much. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. I will obviously keep you updated on all the podcasts that I record. Hopefully all the funds that we can raise for the Ruth Strauss Foundation. Probably not as much as Red for Ruth Day, I have got to admit. But every little helps.
We're incredibly grateful, and really appreciate you thinking us. And hopefully we can get you to that Red for Ruth Day. Bring on the vaccine, and we're not far away.
Absolutely. Look, enjoy the sun, enjoy homeschooling, and all the best. And we'll speak soon. Thanks so much for coming on.
All right, brilliant. Thank you very much.
We are supporting the Ruth Strauss Foundation with Headstrong and Innings with. Sir Andrew Strauss lost his wife to non-smoking lung cancer in 2018. Just before her death, Ruth and Andrew discussed the idea of setting up a foundation to help other families who would be facing a similar ordeal. The Ruth Strauss Foundation wants to ensure that all families with dependent children facing the death of a parent are offered emotional support and guidance to prepare for the future, allowing them to make the most of their time together. In tandem, they are driving the need for more research and collaboration in the fight against non-smoking lung cancers, which are on the rise and to which Ruth ultimately lost her life. You can support their cause by making a donation today. To donate, text RSF10 to 70191 to donate £10. Or you can donate online at virginmoneygiving.com/fund/headstrong/RSF. Thank you for all your support of Headstrong and the Ruth Strauss Foundation. And that concludes Headstrong Season 5 and Innings with. Thank you very much to Sir Andrew Strauss for giving me his time to chat on this podcast. I really appreciate everything that he said, and I really hope that you found it insightful and indeed inspiring to listen to such a legend of the game, but also such an incredibly generous and grounded man. If you have enjoyed this series and you've missed a few of the guests, feel free to scroll back through the catalogue and have a listen to some of the other legends of the game. That's it for me on this series. If you have enjoyed it, please do leave a rating, a review, and do hit subscribe. Season 6 is well underway in the works, and I really can't wait to bring that to you soon. For now though, thank you so much for joining me on Headstrong, and I hope you stay safe, stay well, and I wish you all the best.